At 5:45 a.m. sharp, when the city was still half asleep and the office lights at Creswell Holdings hadn't even flickered on, she was already there. Her sneakers were now flat from endless steps. Her gray janitor's uniform had faded after years of scrubbing, wiping, and hauling her squeaky cart down polished hallways. She always carried a rag in her pocket and wore the same quiet, unreadable expression to the staff. She wasn't Denise Jenkins. She wasn't Mrs. Jenkins. She wasn't even Denise from accounting. She was just Miss Denise, the janitor. After day, she cleaned up crumpled napkins left behind in conference rooms. She picked gum off the break room floor. She wiped fingerprints from the elevator buttons no one ever thought twice about. And while she worked, people spoke around her, through her, above her. To them, she was invisible, like wallpaper in the background of their busy, self-important lives. But here's what they never knew. Miss Denise was not invisible. She listened. She absorbed. She learned. She overheard arrogant jokes in corner offices. She caught whispers that weren't supposed to be whispered. She memorized the cruelty, the ego, and the lies. One day, a marketing rep left an entire sandwich perched on top of the trash can instead of inside it. Denise threw it away silently. The man didn't thank her. Not even close. Instead, he sneered, "Make sure the carpet's dry before the 3 o'clock meeting." The very next day, that same man spilled his coffee and had the nerve to blame her for not cleaning properly. Denise didn't protest. She didn't argue. She just nodded. On the 4th floor, a senior VP, loud, dripping in cologne, once chuckled with his assistant and said, "Can you imagine working here your whole life and not even having a desk?" They laughed. Denise heard every word, but she didn't need their approval. She didn't need their validation. Because if only they had known the truth, their smug laughter would have died instantly. Denise owned more of that company than anyone in the building, and she had been waiting for the right moment to show them long. Before she ever picked up a mop in that building, Denise sat at a small kitchen table in Columbus, Georgia. It was the late 1990s. Bills piled on one side of the table, coffee mugs on the other. Across from her sat her husband, Roland Jenkins, a man full of raw drive, ambition you couldn't teach, the kind that burned bright enough to build something out of nothing. Roland had grown up hauling deliveries for his uncle, running routes across Alabama and South Carolina. He knew logistics like the back of his hand, long before anyone called it supply chain. But Roland wasn't alone. Beside him was Denise, quiet but sharp. While Roland dreamed big, Denise broke things down, piece by piece, seeing what others missed. She had a way of solving problems without ever raising her voice. In 1998, Roland and his friend Curtis Banning scraped together just enough to launch a freight brokerage. They had one tiny office, 2 flip phones, and a fax machine that barely worked. That was it. The first real investment didn't come from Curtis. It didn't even come from Roland. It came from Denise. Her father had passed away and left her a modest life insurance payout. Most people would have used it for a down payment on a house. But Denise saw something different. "Put it in your name," she told Roland one night. "I'll stay in the background. Nobody needs to know." Roland hesitated. "Are you sure?" Denise looked him dead in the eye. "I know what I'm doing, and I trust you." Over the next 6 years, the company exploded. Curtis handled networking, Roland ran operations, and Denise, quietly, invisibly, tracked every single dollar. She filed the paperwork. She wrote contracts under a separate LLC she secretly created just in case. Everything seemed unstoppable until 2004. A late-night run on I-85, a driver too tired to see the danger ahead. A trailer flipped. And just like that, Roland was gone. The funeral was quick. Curtis gave a stiff, business-like speech that barely mentioned Denise. That was the first red flag. The second came weeks later when Curtis filed new documents, removing Roland's name completely. He cut Denise out of internal communications, assuming she'd just fade away. But Curtis underestimated her. Because Denise wasn't just a grieving widow. She had receipts, legal ones. From the very beginning, she had proof that she owned an equal share of Roland's half. She could have marched into court right then and demanded control. But she didn't. Why? because Denise understood something Curtis never would. Power is nothing without timing. Though she stayed silent. No lawsuits, no press, no threats, just patience. And in 2007, when she saw a tiny ad for a janitorial position at Creswell Logistics, she circled it, smiled, and applied under a fake name with a borrowed address. 2 days later, she walked through the same doors she once helped build, not as an owner, but as a janitor. Curtis didn't recognize her. Nobody did, and by then, a new face was in charge. Thomas Wexler, a flashy MBA from Florida State, a man who knew how to wear a suit but nothing about the company's soul. And so Denise began her second life inside Creswell, pushing a cart, scrubbing floors, and collecting secrets. For 15 years. By the 10th year of her second life as a janitor, Denise knew every inch of Creswell Holdings headquarters in Birmingham, Alabama. She knew the hallway with the loose floorboard. She knew the microwave that sparked if you slammed it too hard. She even knew which directors routinely used the company credit card for personal dinners. Denise didn't have to guess anymore. She knew the truth. What had started as a small, tight-knit logistics firm had rotted into something cold and bloated. Executives hid behind glass walls, spouting corporate jargon, while warehouse workers came in with aching backs, holding overtime slips that never got approved. She overheard HR whispering about cutting corners on health benefits. She saw managers escorted out in silence, fired without warning, because they dared to speak up. One man, Terrence Doyle, made the mistake of mentioning pay disparities in a staff meeting. Within a week, he was gone. Through it all, Denise remained invisible. No one lowered their voices around her. No one thought she mattered enough to filter their words. But she wasn't just listening anymore. She was recording. In her locker, hidden behind a plastic bag of spare gloves, she kept a little black notebook. Page after page, she filled it with dates, names, quotes, word-for-word records of what she saw and heard. And flip through it and you'd find chilling entries. Feb 14, we can cut the bonus pool for lower staff. They'll take what we give them. Wexler to CFO, room 58, June 3, warehouse safety violation ignored. Man slipped, no paperwork filed. Brenda witnessed it. Aug 19 heard Wexler say, let the janitor clean it up. That's what she's paid for. I was standing right there. It wasn't bitterness that fueled her. It was clarity. The company wasn't just broken, it was rotten. A night, around 11:45, she pushed her cart past the 6th-floor executive suite. The conference room light was still on. She paused and listened. Wexler's voice carried, if he doesn't like his pay, he can try DoorDash. I've got 20 more resumes waiting. Laughter filled the room. Then another VP, Meredith Chandler, sneered. Half these folks should be grateful we even let them in the building. They all laughed again. Denise stood silently in the hallway, her hands gripping the mop handle. She didn't feel anger. Not anymore. What she felt was confirmation. This place couldn't be fixed by asking nicely. It had to be rebuilt from the ground up. So she began planning. At a quiet diner off Highway 280, she met her lawyer, Elliot Miles. She slid him a flash drive filled with 15 years of evidence, notes, photos, even recordings. Elliot studied it in silence. When he finally looked up, his voice was low and steady. Denise, once you pull this trigger, it's going to shake the entire building. Denise didn't blink. It's already shaking, they just don't know it yet. Elliot leaned back and nodded. Then I'll start drafting the paperwork. Denise had spent 15 years cleaning up their messes. Now she was about to clean house for real. Sometimes, even the most patient fire only needs a spark. For Denise, that spark came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. She had just finished wiping down the counters in the third-floor break room, emptied the trash, and refilled the cheap powdered creamer they called premium. As she wheeled her cart down the hallway, she stopped. Right there, in the middle of the carpet, sat a paper plate with a half-eaten slice of birthday cake. The fork was still sticking out, chocolate smeared on the floor. It wasn't just careless. It felt deliberate. Like someone had left it there on purpose just to see if she'd pick it up. Denise bent down slowly. And that's when she heard the voice. You missed a spot. She looked up. At the end of the hall stood Thomas Wexler, hands in his pockets, wearing that smug smirk of a man who thought he was untouchable. "Excuse me?" she asked calmly. He stepped closer, pointing at the spotless carpet. "Right there. We've got a client presentation coming up. Think you can give the floor another pass?" There was no stain, not even a scuff. Denise stood up, the plate in one hand, her mop in the other. She stayed silent. Wexler chuckled, shaking his head. "You people, I swear. Sometimes I think you just pretend to clean so you can stay on the clock." Her eyes narrowed, just slightly. "What people is that?" she asked. He waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, come on. Don't be so sensitive. I'm just saying, if I paid you a little more, maybe you'd find the spots before I did." Denise blinked once, expressionless. Then she nodded. "I'll make sure it's spotless." "Good," Wexler said with a grin, clapping his hands once. "That's what I like to hear." He walked away, proud of himself, thinking he had put her back in her place, but he had no idea. That night, Denise didn't go home. Instead, she slipped into the Cresswell Records room, an area she had quiet access to thanks to a badge she'd borrowed months earlier from a careless manager. She worked quickly, pulling files, snapping photos, printing budget reports. And then she found the jackpot. A quarterly bonus report. There, in black and white, was proof. Wexler had awarded himself a $55,000 0 cents performance bonus. Meanwhile, he had slashed employee meal stipends, cut overtime pay for drivers, and frozen raises for janitorial and warehouse staff. The hypocrisy was staggering. But the final straw came the very next morning. In the janitor's locker room, Denise found Cynthia, one of her co-workers, crying. Cynthia's teenage son had been in a car accident. She had begged for a day off to visit him in the hospital. Her request was denied. Not enough coverage, they said. Denise sat quietly, listening to Cynthia choke on tears. To management, Cynthia wasn't a mother. She wasn't a human being. She was just a name on a schedule. That was it. Denise had heard enough. She walked outside, pulled out her phone, and called Elliot. "It's time," she said simply. "Are you sure?" Elliot asked. Denise's voice didn't waver. "I'm sure," Elliot sighed. "It's going to be messy." Denise almost smiled. "I've been cleaning up messes my whole life. Let's go." Over the next 48 hours, the wheels began to turn. Elliot finalized the legal paperwork, a closed-door shareholder meeting was arranged, an emergency review was scheduled under Denise's rights as majority holder. And not a single executive saw it coming. The next morning, Denise walked into the building, not in her faded gray uniform, not pushing her old cleaning cart, but in a navy blue blazer, polished shoes, and a folder tucked neatly under her arm. She took the elevator straight to the boardroom. And that day, everything changed. The Cresswell Holdings boardroom was a shrine to arrogance. 12 leather chairs, a ridiculous chandelier that cost more than most employees' annual salaries, and a massive $14,000 0 cents walnut table that Wexler loved to brag about, as if furniture could prove his worth. At 10:00 a.m. sharp, the quarterly review began. Wexler stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, tie loosened, looking like he owned the air itself. On his left sat Meredith Chandler, his loyal second in command. Next to her was Curtis Banning, the only man in the room who should have known what was about to happen. But even he looked relaxed, oblivious. 5 minutes in, the door opened, and in walked Denise No Mop. No gloves, no cart squeaking behind her. Just a navy blazer, calm footsteps, and a folder in her hand. Wexler frowned immediately. "I'm sorry, we're in a meeting. Maintenance is supposed to come through after hours." Denise didn't blink. "I'm not here for maintenance." The room shifted. Meredith squinted. "Do you have an appointment?" "I do," Denise said, walking slowly to the far end of the table, and the shareholders were properly notified. That's when the door opened again, and in walked Elliot Miles carrying a briefcase. "Good morning," he said smoothly. "My name is Elliot Miles, legal counsel for Mrs. Denise Jenkins, majority shareholder of Cresswell Holdings." Silence. Wexler's smirk faltered. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Denise laid her folder on the table, opened it, and spread out the documents. The original partnership agreements from 1998, updated ownership records, a notarized letter transferring full voting rights to her after Roland's death. Curtis shifted uncomfortably, his face draining of color. "No," he muttered. That can't be right." Denise looked straight at him. "You remember the contracts, Curtis. You helped write them." Curtis froze. Denise took a deep breath. Her voice was calm, but carried the weight of 15 silent years. "For a decade and a half, I've watched this place decay. I've watched bonuses padded, safety violations ignored, and good people punished for asking for basic decency." She turned her gaze directly at Wexler. "And I watched you turn my husband's company into nothing more than a playground for your ego." Wexler scoffed, trying to laugh it off. "This is a mistake, a scam. I don't know what game this is, but—" "It's not a scam," Elliot interrupted firmly. "All documents have been verified. As of this moment, Mrs. Jenkins is exercising her right as majority shareholder to call for a vote of no confidence in the current CDO." The air went still. Wexler slammed both hands on the table. "You don't know what you're doing." Denise walked slowly around the table, meeting the eyes of each board member one by one. 15 years, she said quietly. "You all looked past me. You let people suffer. You let this company rot. I gave you every chance to show some humanity, and you failed." She stopped right at Wexler's chair. "You think I can't take over?" She leaned in. "I am the company." Elliot calmly placed a stack of envelopes in front of each board member. "Effective immediately," he announced. "Mr. Thomas Wexler's contract is terminated. Security has been notified." Wexler's face went red. "You can't do this!" Curtis whispered under his breath, almost in disbelief. "She already did." Seconds later, the door opened. 2 security officers walked in. They didn't need to say a word. Wexler looked around desperately for support. None came. He grabbed his phone, his pride, and stormed out. Meredith followed quickly, pretending she suddenly had another meeting. And just like that, the room that had once ignored Denise now hung on her every word. Denise turned back to the board. "I'm not here to play boss," she said firmly. "I'm here to rebuild what this company was supposed to stand for." A young board member, barely 30, raised his hand nervously. "What's the first step?" Denise smiled softly. "Start by listening to the people who've been ignored the longest." And with that, the janitor had become the judge. The following Monday morning, Denise did something she had never done before. She parked in the executive lot. The space was bigger, closer, even covered from the rain, but as she stepped out of her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that this lot was built for people who had never truly sweated a day in their lives. Still, she straightened her blazer, held her head high, and walked in. At the front desk, the receptionist blinked in shock. "Good morning, Tasha," Denise greeted warmly. The young woman stammered, "Miss Denise?" No cart, no mop, just a notebook in her hand and a full calendar waiting for her. By 9:30 a.m., she was sitting in her new office. The walls were freshly painted. The same corner view that Wexler used to brag about was now hers. But Denise wasn't interested in staring out the window. She had work to do, real work. The very first thing she did was call a meeting. Not for the board, not for the executives, for everyone else. Drivers, admin staff, janitors, customer service reps, HR clerks, the people who had been ignored for years. When they filed into the large meeting room, the air was tense. Confusion, suspicion, no one knew what to expect. Then Denise walked in. Not behind a microphone, not with a prepared script. Just her steady voice. "I want to start," she said, "by saying thank you. Most of you never knew who I was. And you didn't need to, because your work has always spoken louder than any title in this building." The room went silent. "I'm here to change things," she continued. "But not by myself. I've spent years listening quietly. Now, I want to hear you out loud." A long pause. Then, slowly, a driver named Alonzo raised his hand. "Does this mean we're getting our overtime back?" "Yes," Denise replied without hesitation. "And retroactive pay for the last 2 quarters. You'll see it on Friday's check." Murmurs spread. Then a woman from HR, Deborah, stood up nervously. And the health coverage? It's been getting worse every year. Denise nodded. We're already reviewing new providers, and this time every single employee will get a survey to weigh in. No more backroom decisions about your well-being. This time, the room wasn't silent. It buzzed. People whispered, glanced at one another, slowly realizing she was dead serious. Another voice spoke up from the back. What about the people Wexler let go without cause? We're reviewing those cases now, Denise said firmly. If you were wrongfully dismissed, you'll be contacted. No guarantees, but at the very least your name will be cleared. And then from another corner of the room, You're really the owner? Denise smiled. Always have been. By the time the meeting ended, she left with one promise echoing across the room. If you speak, I will listen. And if you work, you will be respected. From that day forward, things didn't get easier, they got harder. Executives resisted her. Some tried to block her reforms. One even questioned whether she had the business background to run a company. Denise looked him in the eye and said quietly, I scaled my grief into silence for 15 years. I think I can manage your spreadsheets. That shut him up. She promoted overlooked employees into leadership. She renegotiated contracts. She revived the annual Employee Appreciation Day that had mysteriously disappeared from the budget years ago. She ate lunch in the break room. She walked the warehouses. She sat with the very people Wexler once dismissed as expendable. Slowly the building began to feel different. Not softer, not weaker, just more real. And one night she returned to her office to find a note waiting for her. It was from Cynthia, the janitor whose request for time off had once been denied. The note read, I didn't think anybody like us could ever make it to a place like that. You proved me wrong. Denise kept it in her top drawer, because for her it wasn't about titles. It was about restoring dignity to people who had been invisible for too long. Even after the dust settled, after Wexler was gone and Denise had begun rebuilding the company, one question hung in the air, whispered in the hallways, murmured in break rooms, asked directly in cautious tones. Why did she wait so long? 15 years. 15 years of silence. 15 years of mopping floors, nodding at insults, carrying trash bags while holding the keys to the kingdom in her back pocket. Some asked out of curiosity, some asked with doubt, and a few asked with quiet resentment, as if Denise had let things decay too far before stepping in. But Denise never grew defensive. She would sit back in her chair, lace her fingers together, and answer the same way every single time, because power only matters when you know how to use it. Denise hadn't waited out of fear. She wasn't hiding because she was weak. She waited because the company needed to show its true face without her influence. She needed the rot to rise to the surface, undeniable and unignorable, because if she had stepped in too early, they would have gaslighted her. They would have twisted her actions, saying she was overreacting, claiming she was making noise over nothing. But 15 years of silence, 15 years of receipts, that made her undeniable. When she finally acted, there was no debate. No argument strong enough to undo the mountain of truth she carried with her. She didn't win through shouting matches or power plays. She simply revealed what already existed, and the weight of their own corruption crushed them. The janitor had become the witness, and eventually, the judge on afternoon, Denise walked back through the same hallway where Wexler had once mocked her, pointing at a spot she missed. Same carpet, same light, but now spotless. And no one dared talk down to her. An intern passed by, hesitated, then nervously said, Hi, Mrs. Jenkins. Denise smiled softly. Just Denise. That afternoon she hosted a small gathering in the company courtyard. No speeches, no banners, just food trucks, folding chairs, and the sound of employees laughing again. Alonzo, the driver who once asked her about overtime, raised his soda can and clinked it against hers. To the quiet ones, he said. Denise lifted her can. To the ones they never saw coming. And that was the lesson. It wasn't just about her ownership. It wasn't just about taking back a company. It was about how easily we judge people by their uniforms, how quickly we talk over someone holding a mop, How carelessly we assume a person's value is tied to the title on their office door. Denise wasn't the exception. She was the reminder. People are not invisible just because you stop looking at them. And sometimes, the one sweeping the floor is the one who built the house. So maybe the next time you walk past someone you've never really spoken to, pause. Say hello, because you never know, they might be holding the keys to the entire building.